Alright, my Honda Element is a piece of shit. While I was away with the Army Reserve for a year or so, my dad decided to take care of it. And, as is the nature of everything in my life, it broke the moment I needed it most, which happened to be just before I got back. What went wrong? Judging by the fact that the Element would turn over and run, if you can call it that, it told us that it probably wasn't an electrical issue. However, the way it seemed to choke on the air, coupled with the magic disappearance of coolant, led us to believe that a head gasket was the main culprit. Which it was, kind of. It was the main culprit. I'll get into what else is wrong with it here in a minute. Taking it apart. Opening up the engine was a pain as it is. It took us about 3 days to take the engine apart and put it back together, spending about 10 hours or so each day. We were right about the head gasket too. It was blown completely. The previous owners seemed to have blown it before I'd even gotten the car, a month or two before I left for the Army. And they had simply filled it with some kind of stop leak, just enough for it to run good enough and to sell. After replacing the head gasket and reassembling the engine, we thought we'd finally fixed the issue. So it was especially funny when this time around it wouldn't even start. Day 4. Turns out we'd messed up the timing chain. We didn't know the timing because the off-brand yee-ass timing chain didn't have factory teeth marks on it. So, after some guesswork, she was reassembled.
I don't think I've ever heard her sound that good before in my life. You might have been right about that timing, I don't know.
This only kind of fixed the car. What else was wrong? Now, it would run, but it misfired on all cylinders. Well, not quite all cylinders. We never got a code for cylinder 3 misfiring, just all the others. So I guess that one was fine. We ran a compression test, and behold, my compression was like 140 to 160 pounds per square inch in all cylinders. And stock seems to be around 200 to 210 from what we found on local forums. And I say was 140 to 160. It still is 140 to 160, but we thought that was the problem, which is why it's relevant. So that's what we wrote it up to. Bad compression. But there was a catch. A bind, if you will. There's this big job that I had interviewed for while I was still in training over in Maryland, actually. And I told the manager that I was free to meet in person this following Friday. And this was Monday at the time, where we'd assembled the car, and I had good faith that it was going to run perfectly fine. And yeah, meeting with him Friday was going to be no big issue. But that was before it got the engine reassembled and found out that it misfired. So I had just 4 days to figure out what else was wrong with the car. Spoiler alert, I never figured out what was wrong, at least not before driving down to meet him. So I figured that it only misfired at high RPMs, so as long as I could make it to the highway, I'd be fine, because once you're up to speed, and I've shifted into those higher gears, it ran fine. Everyone told me not to go. My dad was super adamant not to go to this interview that was 200 miles away. But I told him sometimes we need to have a little bit of faith. And I had faith in my car that it would be just good enough. It was just good enough. I ended up making it back just fine, and now we had time to look under the hood and try and figure out why it was misfiring. The compression was bad, but my dad didn't think that it was bad enough to cause the misfire, so we went through a series of tests to try and figure out what else was wrong. My dad had told me that the coils had probably been fried when the head gasket blew. My coils, spark plugs, all that. We replaced the spark plugs. He had a brand new set on him, in the shop rather, and then we borrowed some coils from a car that he also happened to have in his shop. The coils made it run a little better, but soon, and I say soon, on like our 1 mile test drive, the misfires came right back. It looked like I had no other avenue but to replace the block and hope for the best. But in the meantime, I needed to get another set of coils because, I was just borrowing those from the car in a shop. And wouldn't you know it, the new set of coils actually worked. Turns out that it wasn't just my coils that had been burnt out, but apparently the coils in the car in my dad's shop were also bad. Even the owner didn't know it because the engine and the coils and everything that had been purchased for that project had never fully ran together as it was. So we didn't know that they were bad coils. As soon as the coils were in my car, fired up and ran just fine. So my car, up until replacing the coils, had driven for 400 miles with the head gasket replaced with the misfires. Another 200 miles goes by over the course of the week after we'd replaced the coils. Just driving to my dad's house, to the shop, running errands, that kind of thing. And as soon as I hit that 600 mile mark, after replacing the head gasket, disaster struck. My radiator exploded. Not that I could have been any luckier, mind you, of where it exploded. Actually at my storage unit, grabbing stuff. So I broke down in a walled off area near my dad's shop in a parked position, which was super important because if I had exploded on any other road or, forbid the highway, my engine would have really overheated, which probably would have meant the compression would have been worse. At the very least, I would have had to replace the head gasket, coils, spark plugs, all of that. But again, I was parked, so I was in my storage unit grabbing stuff. I had my car on just to play music, and I heard that whoosh. Immediately ran out, turned the car off, and sent a picture to my dad as well as a couple of my friends, telling them that my car exploded. And my dad came over, towed it to the shop. Whatever. Radiator was super easy, but again, this happened as I was getting stuff out of my storage unit to drive, again, the 200 miles back to where my job site was, so I could, obviously live in another town 200 miles away from where I was staying. So again, super grateful that it happened there. But the point of this video is that it's a piece of shit. So, lo and behold, I did make it to town in one piece with all my stuff. My computer, my comically large futon behind me, which doesn't have its cover on it because I'm watching it because it's been in storage for, a year and a half. Bags and bags of clothes, camera gear, and a lot of other stuff that I probably don't need. But I think it's important to remember that all this stuff, 99% of the stuff that I brought with me, I couldn't have brought without this car. I'll show you what the futon by itself looks like in the CRX, which is a blown transmission, which is why I bought the Element to begin with. But even if the CRX did run, because I do have a new transmission for it, there's no way I could have gotten any of the stuff here. It just wouldn't have been possible. The Element has nearly 300,000 miles on her, and with those miles, she's seen a lot of road. Passed through a lot of hands. She's been abused, neglected, and unappreciated. When I got her, she didn't have any fancy things. Most of her trim pieces were broken, her glove box was missing, and her charging port didn't work. She didn't have running boards or crossbars, or a roof rack, or a full spare. A spare that matches, by the way. I didn't want one from a different trim or anything like that. I wanted one that matched perfectly, just because I think I'm bougie like that. Don't get me wrong. She's still a piece of shit. But she's my piece of shit, and I wouldn't trade her for the world. I've always wanted an Element, ever since I was a little kid. The compact SUV that I could travel the world in. I'd always envisioned a tan one growing up, let's be honest, because tan ones are cool, military, whatever. The FJ Cruisers and the Land Rovers and all that, the off-roading builds. That's initially what I'd pictured. But admittedly, the red one suits me best. It says, look at me, I'm here.